The third generation Avensis was equipped with naturally aspirated ZR series engines. They differ from each other in working volume, and specifically in the stroke of the pistons. Their cylinder diameters are exactly the same. ZR engines have light alloy cylinder blocks. The crankshaft is located offset relative to the cylinder axis. This reduces the pressure and friction of the piston skirts on the cylinders during the power stroke. This engine has hydraulic compensators and a timing chain drive. Overall, you can expect endless reliability from these motors, but there are a few caveats. These engines are equipped with a system of continuously variable intake valve lift control. It's called Valvomatic. This is Toyota's Valvotronic, only it is designed simpler and more rationally. True, the system is not ideal in terms of reliability. All its problems are concentrated in the actuator, which is installed at the end of the cylinder head on the flywheel side. The actuator went through a dozen revisions. 222A037023 Japanese engineers took a long time to bring it to fruition. By and large, its problems mainly appear in the electronic control board, which is located right there in the actuator body. When the system is faulty, the engine barely pulls, not raising the speed above 2000. Sometimes it comes to life after a restart, but not for long. Due to problems with some early versions of Valvomatic actuator, the engine may stall while driving and may not restart. A new Valvomatic unit costs about $1,000. Used options cost about $300. However, this miracle of Japanese engineering is now quite successfully repaired. You can buy already restored actuators. By the way, they can be repaired if the contacts are shorted. There is also a solution with flashing the engine control unit when the Valvomatic system is simply removed by software and does not work. In this case, the air flow in the cylinder is regulated by the throttle valve, which is present in the intake tract. There is a vacuum pump installed next to the Valvomatic actuator. Problems with it also occur, which are accompanied by extraneous grinding and slurping sounds. Sometimes the brake pedal becomes tighter, because the performance of the vacuum system pump decreases. It is best to replace this pump with a new one. 293000TO20, 293000WO22, 29,300 to 37,011. This pleasure will cost $500, but you can buy a pump with the latest revision. There are also traditional methods of repair, but they are not very reliable and durable. By the way, terrible sounds and rumbles under the hood of gasoline Avensis appear due to jamming of the overrunning clutch. 2741500TO10, the generator. It is installed here in combination with any of the ZR engines. Vibrations and shocks will be transmitted to the belt of mounted units. Just replace the alternator pulley with clutch with a new one. Often these engines begin to leak oil in the area of the chain tensioner. In some cases, oil seeps not through the gasket under the tensioner cover, 13,552 to 37,010, but from under the timing case along the joint between the cylinder block and the cylinder head. In this case, you will have to remove the entire front engine cover and attach it with new sealant around the entire perimeter, paying attention to the joint under the cylinder head above the chain tensioner. ZR series engines are designed for operation on thin oil with a viscosity of 5 watts minus 20, 0 watts minus 20. Something thicker and simply of poor quality leads to coking of the box-shaped oil scraper rings. Some engines begin to consume 1 to 2 liters of oil between changes, but it is possible to reduce the oil appetite by decoking. These engines are equipped with phase shifters. They are here on each camshaft. It's not often that these clutches, 130500TO22, 13,070 to 37,010, start to rattle when cold. Health depends on the quality and purity of the oil. By the way, new original phase shifters are not that expensive, $170 each. 2.0D4D 126 horsepower 1AD FTV, 2.2D4D 136 horsepower, 150 horsepower 2AD FTV, 2.2D Cat 177 horsepower 2AD FHV. Toyota Avensis third generation with diesel engines was sold in large volumes in Europe and imported from there. This car was equipped with 2 and 2.2 liter AD series turbo diesels of its own production. These engines differ in piston stroke. The 2.2 liter has a longer piston stroke, naturally. Let's start with the fact that you won't find such diesel engines with actual mileages of less than 200,000 kilometers on Avensis cars today. All of them have probably covered 500,000 kilometers, and what their odometer shows is often far from the truth. These Japanese turbo diesels with aluminum cylinder blocks are really very reliable. True, until 2009 they often experienced depressurization of the cylinder head gasket. This problem was eliminated under warranty and as part of recall campaigns. True, very rarely, this still happens. These engines also show oil consumption. Toyota even increased the engine warranty to 7 years or 180,000 kilometers. Oil consumption of more than 300 grams per 1,000 kilometers is considered a warranty case. Dealers first replace the pistons with rings, and then the cylinder blocks. The latest service bulletin regarding this unpleasant feature of AD series diesel engines was published in 2019 and also affects the third generation Avensis. In general, when buying a Toyota with its 4-cylinder engine, it is worth making sure that it does not consume oil and whether it has not been affected by replacing the cylinder block. Many things indicate oil burns: excessive smoke from the oil filler neck, liquid deposits in the exhaust pipe, and abundant, often oily deposits in the intake system and near the EGR valve. It is important to distinguish between these engines based on the cost of repairing the fuel system. All the fuel equipment here is from Denso, led by the HP3 pump. The injection pump is reliable but, however, it will not survive several refills with frankly dirty diesel fuel. With normal fuel once every 200,000 kilometers, it may be necessary to change the metering valves, SCV valves. In the D4D versions they are installed only on the injection pump, and in the D-Cat, on both the injection pump and on the fuel rail. Once every 100,000 kilometers, you need to remove all the injectors and change the fireproof washers on which they are installed. The condition of the injectors can be assessed quite simply by how the engine starts when cold. The long and painful startup of turbodiesels in most cases is due to the fact that the injectors excessively drain fuel into the return line and the nozzles receive very little fuel. In general, the D4D versions are cheaper. They have relatively inexpensive DCRI 200,430, $360 each, and repairable electromagnetic injectors. D-Cat injectors are piezoelectric, expensive, DCRI 200,420, $900 each, and cannot be repaired. The same injectors also went to D4D engines for Euro 5. Also, all of these Toyota diesels, if they have a particulate filter, have a separate injector 23,710 to 26,012, installed in the exhaust manifold, which injects fuel there for combustion. This nozzle is connected to the injection pump by a separate steel tube. It goes from the pump down to the exhaust manifold. At high mileage this injector leaked, i.e. fuel was constantly dripping in front of the diesel particulate filter, causing gray smoke to constantly come out of the exhaust pipe. But in general this is not a troublesome and rational solution. The particulate filter is burned more efficiently, and the engines are not in danger of diluting the oil with diesel fuel. In general, the more complex D-Cat system is a multi-stage exhaust system, where there is a particulate filter, carbon monoxide neutralizer, and a separate nitrogen oxide neutralizer. Naturally, all environmental systems from the D4D and D-Cat diesel engines were cut out and removed. By the way, it is very important that the deletion is carried out correctly programmatically, and not everyone can do this, because the Denso control unit is a tough nut to crack. Often, to reflash and remove the environment, technicians open the control unit to connect to its processor. Masters with the right and expensive equipment remove the environment through the OBD connector. 6th Street Manual Transmission EC60EB60, Avensis got 6th place. Manual transmissions, which sometimes begin to hum after running about 150,000 kilometers. In them, the rear bearing of the input shaft wears out. To replace it you will have to open the gearbox. Aisin-Toyota K111/K310/K311, the third generation Toyota Avensis with gasoline engines, was equipped with a proprietary variator, which was developed by Aisin. This is a reliable and durable variator, because made well and strangled by software. The control unit does not allow him to be openly tormented. Naturally, this variator works thoughtfully. In order for it to serve for a really long time, the special CVT fluid TC oil should be partially replaced every 40,000 kilometers. Aisin U660E 6-speed automatic transmission. In general, as for hydromechanical automatic transmissions, the third generation Avensis had them and only worked in tandem with a 2.2-liter turbo diesel. These cars received the U660 transmission from Aisin. This is a completely reliable unit, although, given the typical mileage of diesel Avensis, it is possible that many of them have already undergone major overhauls, and the rest are close to this. And often these transmissions come for overhaul due to the destruction of the main housing bearing. Or rather, at first the weak retaining ring of this bearing cannot withstand it, then misalignment occurs, a backlash arises, from which the entire mechanism planes steel and aluminum shavings. Even the planetary gearbox shifts, causing even more wear products to appear and settle in the valve body. In addition to replacing the Toyota WS transmission fluid every 50,000 kilometers, it is also worth changing the filter located behind the pan. And you need to give up aggressive driving because it is excessive loads that cause wear of the bearing retaining ring and all subsequent troubles. An interesting feature of the rear wheel bearings 42,450-05080 of the third generation Toyota Avensis is that they come with a hubs, plus they have an ABS sensor built into them. Purely for age reasons, i.e. due to the duration of operation and the influence of dirt, moisture and reagents, the hubs have to be replaced. More precisely, the problem arises precisely in the ABS sensor. Its contacts in the electrical connector corrode and simply fall off. New original hubs and rear wheel bearings cost about $270, but they last at least 200,000 kilometers. It is probably worth using some kind of contact protection measures in the connectors of the rear ABS sensors, so as not to change expensive hubs due to corrosion of two pins. The front ABS sensors, 89,542-02061 on the Avensis, are inserted and screwed to the steering knuckles. They last at least 250,000 kilometers and cost $140 in the original. The front wheel bearings, 43,552-02020, are also prefabricated and sell for $200. There are plenty of substitutes for all hubs and sensors. Prices are 3 times lower than the original. The third generation Avensis is equipped with an electric steering rack, which, when used intensively on rough roads, begins to make a loud knock. There is nothing surprising or unique about this. It knocks due to wear on the guide bushings along which the gear shaft slides. In general, the knocking noise in the steering rack is overcome by the installation of new bushings. Sometimes a knock appears in a worn steering shaft or in a loose screw, 90119W0013, that secures the lowest elbow, 45,221-05040, of the steering shaft. Accordingly, you need to determine the source of the knock. The knocking crosspiece is still loose. It can be replaced with a new non-original one, ST1639. And the screw is at the bottom, i.e. above the rail itself. You just need to tighten it. We should also mention that knocking can be caused by the electric booster shaft. Its motor is located on the steering shaft, literally above the driver's knees. A slight knocking sound appears in the gearbox, i.e. between the electric motor shaft gear and the gear on the steering shaft. To eliminate this, you can place an elastic material such as rubber under the lock of the thrust ring, which compresses the shaft bearing. It is located under the cover near the electric power steering gearbox. Over time, the Avensis's brake calipers begin to rattle. They all have a floating caliper. Sometimes, in search of the source of the rumble or just metallic rattling, they begin to change everything in the suspension. And in vain. Tap the wheels and the calipers will respond. You just need to change the caliper guide pins. For long runs, i.e. after 250,000 kilometers, problems can be expected from the parking brake mechanism, 46,300-05011. The handbrake drive on the Avensis 3 is electromechanical. There are times when moisture gets into the electrical connector, which is located directly in the plastic housing of the servo. This ends with the contact chip melting. Sometimes moisture gets inside the case, which leads to the death of the electronic board, but more often the wires in the braid of wires to the handbrake servo drive fray and break. The suspension of the third generation Toyota Avensis is very durable and inexpensive. Let's start with the fact that the ball joints are removed separately. They are unscrewed from the levers. The original balls, 43,332-09770, cost about $70. Original front control arm bushings are not sold separately. To avoid paying $180 for new branded levers, 48,069-05080, you can buy non-original high-quality silent blocks. They cost about $10. There are also many offers for non-original lever assemblies. The average price of such parts is $100. Original stabilizer struts, 48,820-02070, cost about $25 and last up to 100,000 kilometers. The support bearings, 48,619-28,010, of the shock absorbers and the shock absorber struts themselves, 4852-009 and 61, last more than 250,000 kilometers. True original front shock absorbers cost about $300. At the rear, all Avensis have a multi-link, 5 levers for each wheel. Original silent blocks for these levers are not offered. Everything has to be selected from a non-original one in order to save money. You can choose either silent blocks or entire levers. Front trailing arm silent blocks from good manufacturers cost about $20. Upper arm, 48,770-12,010, about $30. Lower control arms that attach to the trunnion via ball joints, 48,710-05090, cost up to $40. Not original silent block of the spring-loaded lever, i.e. in connection with the trunnion, The non-original costs $20 to $40. Since the Avensis is a sedan or station wagon primarily for Europe, its body is designed for use in winter. Its body metal is galvanized, so it is perfectly protected from corrosion. Even the roof panel is galvanized, so chips above the windshield will not rust for a long time. However, if the galvanized layer is pierced or worn, hints of rust will appear. At risk are the edges of wheel arches and the joints of bumpers with body panels. Headlight lamps become cloudy over time and, naturally, become rubbed with stones and dirt. During the warranty period, front doors on Avensis cars were replaced because cracks appeared on them at the places where the opening limiters were attached. These cracks literally ran along a line from one mounting screw to another. If for some reason the owner did not get to the dealer, he often simply installed a plate in the door to strengthen the metal. In general, there were no cases where the stopper came off the door due to a crack. A curious feature of the third-generation Toyota Avensis is that literally due to any malfunction in the electrical system of the equipment, it displays a message on the instrument panel indicating a malfunction of the VSC, stabilization system, and the parking brake. In most cases, these messages have nothing to do with either the VSC or the electric handbrake. You need to read the errors with a scanner. There will be real data there. And it could be anything from a misfire, a malfunctioning valve-o-matic, to burnt out LEDs in your brake lights. They burn out due to moisture getting into the lights, which is accompanied by fogging.